Hey Growler Nation, my name's Ben with Growler Bikes, and today we're going to be talking about tire pressures. Our bikes cover a wide range of tire sizes, and spoiler alert, there is no one perfect pressure for everybody. It's going to be different depending on the rider weight, depending on the size of the tire, the width of the rim, and of course, where you're riding, and also personal preference. So there's a lot of moving parts to it. So today we're going to cover some recommended tire pressures for our bikes, so that you can have a better riding experience. First up is one of the more common fat bike tires that we use, the Maxxis Colossus 27.5 by 4.5. It's a very high volume tire. So being that there's so much volume in there, when you're only running 4 to 6 PSI, a half a pound makes a big difference. Most floor bicycle pumps that people have at home for a road bike that goes to 140 PSI is not going to read accurately at those low pressures. What we recommend is that you get a low pressure specific tire gauge. These are pretty cool. This is AccuGauge, it has a little bleed valve on it. You can buy them for mountain bike applications specifically where they max out at either 15 or 30 PSI, but it makes it a lot easier to read accurately at low pressures. There's also digital gauges that will read in either half pound or tenth of a pound increments, and it just allows you to have some consistency and always get the tire pressure that you're looking for. So in the summertime, someone my size, roughly 200 pounds, is gonna run this tire 8 or 9 PSI maybe in the rear and 7 or 8 PSI in the front. I usually run a little bit lower pressure in the front. Most of your body weight is on the rear wheel, and having a little bit lower pressure in front is not only good for ride compliance, good comfort for your hands, but it also gives you a little more grip out on the trail. So this same tire in the winter on the snow, depending on how cold it is and how tough the conditions are, I could run this tire below 2 PSI, it could be around 1 PSI. It sounds extreme, but generally speaking, the rule of thumb is the worse the conditions in the snow, the harder it is to get traction, the lower you want your tire pressure to be. There's a lot of different types of snow conditions. There is no one set tire pressure recommended for riding on the snow. If you're riding a packed trail that's heavily trafficked or groomed, you can get away with running higher pressures and you don't need to be real precise. But the worse the conditions, the more challenging it is, the lower you want to go. So one of the ways that I set my tire pressure when I go for a ride in the snow, not knowing exactly what the snow condition is going to be until you get there, I usually start with a pound or pound and a half more than I think I'm going to want when I get to the trail. And I'll actually take my hand and compress the tire and feel how much air is in the tire. So for instance, if you have your bike indoors or in the basement or even in the garage where the temperature could be 30 or 40 or 50 degrees warmer than it is outside, when you take it outside, the pressure is going to drop quite a bit. Sometimes it's better for me, I'll just set the pressure a little bit high until I get to the trail, and then I can bleed a little bit out so I can find the optimal tire pressure for those trail conditions or that day. So for the same 27.5 wheel and tire that comes on the Nitro Stout or the American Stout, we also run 3.8 to 4-inch tires, and because it's a slightly lower volume of air, you're gonna have to run a slightly higher pressure. It's not gonna be a huge amount, it might only be a half a pound, but it does change things a little bit. So this wheel and tire is a 26-inch wheel with a 5-inch tire on it. And because it's a smaller diameter wheel, but a higher volume tire, it's gonna actually require a very similar tire pressure to the 27.5 by 4.5. So same thing goes if you have a 26-inch bike on an older model or something like that. This here is a 29 plus, 29 by 3.0, offered on both of our fat bikes as an optional second wheel set, which is a really great setup for the summer. Super fun wheel and tire. It still gives you that high volume feel because you're gonna be running lower pressures, but it's a little bit faster rolling in the summertime. It's a lighter weight tire, and it's still a very tall tire, so it holds momentum really well. This is actually my personal favorite, 29 by 3.0. So these guys, for a 3-inch tire, have a pretty high volume. I run these in the high teens. Again, it's very dependent on the rider weight, but this is mounted on a 50 millimeter rim with a 3-inch tire. 17, 18, 19 PSI is gonna be the sweet spot for someone roughly my size. So this one here is a 27.5 by 2.8, also an option on our American Pale Ale. And this one comes on a 40 millimeter rim with a 2.8-inch tire. It's a little bit smaller and a little bit lower volume, so you're gonna have probably 2 or 3 more pounds per tire than the equivalent 29 plus that we just talked about. This is also going to still give you that really high volume feel, so you still have comfy low tire pressures, but a little bit smaller package. So the B-plus wheels and tires have the reputation of being a little bit more nimble and a little bit quicker handling than a 29 plus. The other wheel and tire package available on the American Pale Ale is 29er wheels and tires. These are coming with 29 by 2.35 tires on a 30 millimeter rim. These are probably going to run in the low 20s, so 21 to 23 pounds, based on someone that's roughly my size. Next up is the American Session IPA wheels. We have two different options here. Road Plus, which I have here. This is a 27.5 by 48C tire. It's a very high volume wheel and tire package. These are probably gonna run in the high 30s, maybe low 40s. Again, depending on rider weight and what you're doing with it. If you're riding off-road, you may wanna run slightly lower pressures to get more grip, whereas if you're riding mostly on pavement or a harder surface, you can add a couple of pounds if you don't need the grip or the ride compliance, and you might get a little bit faster roll out of it. I generally recommend don't go too crazy on the tire pressure, even if you're riding on pavement. You don't have much to gain in the way of speed or rolling efficiency, and you're really just taking away from your ride quality. The other option for the Session IPA is a 700 by 43C tire, and again, it's gonna be a little bit taller tire. So by comparison to the Road Plus, it's gonna hold its momentum a little bit better and generally roll a little bit faster, especially on the pavement. It might be a little bit more aerodynamic as well. We're splitting hairs here a little bit. So for a 700C wheel and tire, you're probably gonna be 2 to 4 pounds higher, maybe 2 to 5 pounds higher than you would with the Road Plus wheels and tires. It is a smaller volume setup, so a couple more pounds will give you a pretty equivalent ride quality. So, aside from some of the basics that we already covered, there's also a good deal of personal preference involved. There's a lot of variables based on where you ride, your riding style. Someone who rides more aggressively and is slamming their bike into berms and stuff like that is gonna need more tire pressure to give you that sidewall support so the tire doesn't fold over in the turns. Obviously, we have a whole variety of customers that have different body weights as well. Someone who weighs 110 pounds obviously is going to need to run a very different tire pressure than someone who's 250 pounds. I definitely encourage people to play around with your tire pressure. Pay attention to it and experiment a little bit. If you ride somewhere that's a little bit smoother and you want to run a couple pounds extra, that's okay. You might get a little more speed out of it, whereas if you're riding technical terrain or loose terrain and you want more grip, dropping your tire pressure down generally adds grip. I usually recommend that you do this in small increments so as you don't go too far one way or the other and potentially get a flat tire, cut a tire, or bend a rim or something like that. So, as you're probably aware, most tires come with a recommended maximum tire pressure rating on the sidewall of the tire. I do not recommend you approach those pressures, not even close. For instance, this 29er tire right here has a recommended max pressure of 60 PSI. For a modern tubeless tire on a modern wide rim, that's an insane amount of air. 25 to 30 would be the upper limit for most people. There are exceptions, of course, but don't necessarily use that maximum tire pressure rating, which is sometimes also based on a tube being in there, not tubeless. So one of the reasons you can run the lower pressures with a tubeless setup is because you don't have to worry about pinch flats. Thanks to tubeless, that's a term that's a thing of the past. Obviously, you're also removing the weight of the tube, so that's awesome, but lower pressure, more grip, better comfort. Tubeless is great. By comparison, for instance, this fat bike tire here, this is a 27.5 by 4.0, has a recommended max pressure rating of 20 PSI. Again, that is more than double what I would recommend most people ride their fat bike tires at. It would just be hard as rock. Some rims may not even be rated to take that kind of pressure. It's okay to slightly overinflate them if you're seating a new tire. It's actually a good thing to help the beads pop into place, but you don't want to leave it there, you don't want to ride it there. Drop it back down, you'll have a better time on the bike. So if you were hoping today that I would be able to pinpoint the exact tire pressure you're supposed to run in all conditions, I'm sorry to disappoint you. It is not that straightforward. It's something people learn over time. It's worth your while to experiment a little bit and dial it in and find what works best for you. So that's it for our tire pressure overview today. Thanks for joining us. If you liked our video, please give us a like. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Thanks again, we'll see you next time.